A giant aircraft stands on the tarmac at Marseille in France. It's been taken over by hijackers who are preparing the worst terrorist atrocity the world has so far seen. The men are heavily armed and carrying powerful explosives. Storm the plane, lose 173 passengers and crew. But let it take off, and there'll be an even bigger price to pay. This is the inside story of the hijacking the world forgot. It's Christmas Eve 1994. An Air France jet is on final approach to Algiers airport. The plane is an Airbus A300 with a crew of 12 on board. Algeria is in a state of civil war. The area around the airport has been the scene of fierce fighting. There's a very real threat of missiles being fired at the plane as it comes in to land. So dangerous is it that Air France, the French state airline, has asked its government if it really needs to continue these flights to Algiers. 3 years earlier, Islamic fundamentalists had won the elections there, hoping to install an Islamic state. But then the military seized power and imprisoned their leaders. Since then, Algeria has descended into chaos. The plane will only be on the ground for the short time it takes to clean, refuel, and board the passengers for the return flight. They're mostly Algerians, but many are French, escaping for a while the perils of life in Algeria. Boarding is nearly over, but then, another sign of the fraught security situation, police board the plane for one more check. This unauthorized delay to Flight 8969 is making the military suspicious. Algerian special forces, known as the Ninjas, are already heading towards the plane. The men are not police, but terrorists. They belong to a violent group of Muslim extremists. They aim to force an Islamic state on Algeria no matter what it takes, and seizing the plane is part of that plan. Outside, news spreads quickly, and reporters arrive at the scene. In Paris, the French Prime Minister is urgently recalled from his Christmas holiday. It's an international crisis. Terrorists decide to put on the flight crew's uniforms to confuse any army snipers. Now, 2 hours into the hijacking, the terrorists order Captain Delem to take off for Paris. They say they're going to hold a press conference there. But the plane can't move. The passenger boarding stairs are still attached, and the Algerian authorities have parked vehicles to block the runways. But the passengers are growing more concerned about what's going on outside. There are signs that the Algerian special forces are preparing for an armed assault. In Paris, the French leaders are frustrated. They believe their own special forces could bring the hijacking to a safe end. But the Algerians refuse to let foreign troops in to sort out an Algerian problem. The passengers have now been held hostage for 7 hours. Initial panic has given way to a tense calm. Few realize that 2 passengers have been murdered. During the night, the French government has decided to send its special forces to the island of Majorca, as close to Algeria as possible without being accused of interfering. Back in Algiers, the terrorists released some passengers, mainly women with young children or people with serious medical conditions. But there are still over 170 people on board, a handful for the 4 young terrorists. 138 of the passengers are Algerian citizens. The terrorists offer to release them, leaving only the French nationals on board. A gruesome indication, perhaps, of their final plan. However, the Algerian passengers refuse to leave. The Algerian government has another trick up its sleeve. They've managed to identify the terrorist leader, Yahya, and bring his mother to the microphone to try to weaken her son's resolve. The Algerian government's tactic misfires. It sends Yahya into a boiling rage. Until now, the terrorists haven't targeted any French citizens, but their time has come. 2 staff members of the French embassy are on board, a secretary and a young chef. The door-open warning light confirms that the terrorists have carried out their threat. The French government can no longer stand by and do nothing. Prime Minister Balladur gets on the phone and threatens his Algerian counterpart. Balladur's threat works. The Algerian president caves in. Finally, after 39 hours of terror, Flight 8969 can leave for France. But there's a problem. All the time they've been on the ground, the captain has kept the auxiliary power unit running. It's a small jet engine in the tail of the plane which keeps the power supply going. It uses around 4 tons of fuel a day. Now there isn't enough to reach Paris. Only Marseille on the southern coast of France. After 2 days of terror and the death of 3 passengers, the Algerian authorities are allowing Flight 8969 to leave for France. The terrorists say they're going to hold a press conference there. At 3:30 in the morning on the 26th of December, the plane approaches Marseille airport. They're unaware that Major Denis Favier and his French special forces have got there ahead of them from Mallorca and are now planning a showdown. The plane is being deliberately led away to a remote corner of the airfield. Tension is very high because the French government has received some alarming news. The French tactics will now be dictated by Major Favier. His plan is to wear the terrorists down. Whilst always appearing conciliatory, the French will spin out negotiations as long as possible. They know that Yahya and his men must be tired. The hijacking has now gone on for almost 2 days. The terrorists have learned from the flight crew that 27 tons of fuel will fill the tanks, far more than the 9 tons needed for the journey to Paris. It appears to confirm the intelligence report that the plane is to be used as a firebomb. The terrorists agree to a press conference aboard the plane, little realizing that it's all part of a clever plan. The negotiators asked that the front of the plane be cleared for the press conference. The real reason is to create a clear area for the French special forces when they storm the plane. Because what the terrorists don't realize is that the plane's doors can be opened from the outside. By now, the plane has been sitting on Marseille's taxiway for 12 hours. The French special forces know how many terrorists there are and where they are. It's believed the French special forces planted microphones on the fuselage of the plane. Now they're waiting for the sun to go down to take advantage of the dark. By 5 o'clock, no fuel has been delivered. The authorities have no intention of allowing the plane to take off. The terrorists know the French negotiators are in the control tower. They decide to send them a message. Major Favier has been given carte blanche by the French Prime Minister Edouard Balladur. He decides the moment has come to act. At the rear of the plane, the other 2 squads of Favier's men enter. Hundreds of bullets are whistling through the cabin. Grenades are exploding. There's smoke and confusion everywhere. The snipers on the terminal route can see the terrorists in the cockpit, but frustratingly can't get a clear shot. The co-pilot is blocking their view. But that problem is about to be solved. Actual video footage shows the co-pilot, Jean-Paul Borderie, falling onto the hard concrete. Yet he still manages to stagger away to safety. It gives the snipers the chance they've been waiting for. Unbelievably, only a few minutes after the assault began, most of the passengers have been rescued. By now, only 1 terrorist is left alive, but he's going down fighting. The final surviving terrorist holds them at bay for almost 20 minutes, but his time and his ammunition are running out. The battle around the cockpit has been so fierce that everyone believes the flight crew are dead. The French special forces suspect that any survivors may be terrorists in disguise. The flight engineer is hustled off the plane and handcuffed. For 20 minutes, the gun battle has raged on board the crowded aircraft. Hundreds of shots have been fired, numerous grenades exploded. Yet all 173 passengers and crew have survived. Captain Delem himself escaped with bullet wounds to his right elbow and thigh. Out of the 161 passengers who survived the hijacking, only a few have suffered slight injuries. All the French special forces and the crew members received high national honors for their courage. Later, a former leader of the Algerian terrorist groups, Omar Chiki, confirmed that the plan had been to blow up the plane over the Eiffel Tower, the symbol of the French nation. Hundreds might have been killed when the plane crashed down onto the crowded streets of Paris. They never tried again, and the world would forget this hijacking. Until 7 years later.